So I'd love to hear a little bit about your experience and tell me how military training helped you become a better SaaS leader.
Sure, Ben. Yes, I spent 12 years in the military. So as a veteran now, I didn't retire. I did 12 years. I didn't do the full 20, but I spent 4 years at the Naval Academy and then 8 years on active duty. 5 of those years I was in flight status. I flew in A6 intruders, and it sounds really cool. It was. I wasn't a pilot. I sat next to the pilot and bitched. And then my last tour of duty was at the Naval Academy where I taught literature. And so that was really the thing I wanted to do with the rest of my life was to teach. But that was my first learning and lesson learned about supply and demand economics. There's a whole lot of people that have PhDs and very few jobs. Got into the business sector.
We got to get into the military stuff first before we get into the literature. And you were the man next to the pilot, which I can only infer means that if we were watching Top Gun, you would be Goose or Merlin, some sort of a navigator.
Exactly. It was a Bombardier navigator. In the A6, you sat next to the pilot. So if the pilot was giving me too much attitude, I'd slap him. It's hard to do from the backseat of the F-14. But yeah, I was ultimately responsible for navigating, and then it was a Bombardier navigator, the weapon systems, et cetera. But it was a really wonderful platform, and all the pilots I flew with were great. And so it was super cool. I will tell you, when you're flying behind the aircraft carrier at night and the aircraft carrier is bouncing around and you're relying on the person next to you to land it so you can get home safely, it's really unnerving, but the Navy does a wonderful job training the really best pilots in the world, and I never was really afraid for my life.
I grew up in a coddled suburb of San Francisco and went to a private school in Boston, not Harvard, only a mile away, and never picked up a gun in my entire life with the exception of Camp Kennelin when I was like 11 years old. I've never raised arms, but everything I've heard about the military is it's about structure and detail and discipline. So tell me what you took out of that experience that applies to what you're doing today as the leader of a mid-sized SaaS company.
I think you're right, Ben. I think in general, those are the core virtues or values that many people appreciate about veterans and when hiring them into their companies. I think the things that aren't as appreciated about military folks is the level of flexibility required and the default to action. And so what I mean by that is one of the things you find in the military, so like flying jets, you're flying at 480 miles an hour. I think that's 8 miles a minute or something like that. It's just wacky, crazy fast, and you're consuming an enormous amount of information, right? You're processing all this data, and you have to be able to react in milliseconds, especially if you're in a combat situation. And I think that is a good metaphor for more broadly in the military. There's this sense of, hey, you're going to have more data than we know what to do with. You got to make decisions based on your training. So they spend a lot of time training people, but you got to make decisions. One of the things I talk about in the military versus the civilian sector, in the military, it's all about lead, follower, or get out of the way. And what I mean by that is you first learn how to be a follower. Take orders, execute orders as long as they're lawful, and do the very best you can. Over time, you learn how to be a leader, and you learn that at times you're going to have to make the decision and be accountable for it. But one of the things you bring in the military setting is who is the leader? How are we going to make this decision? And if you're not there, then get out of the way. If you're not going to be following in terms of executing the mission, you're just wasting time. And I think one of the things that was really unique for me as I transitioned to the military, from the military to the corporate sector, was that lead, follower, get out of the way became lead, follower, let's talk about it. And in the corporate sector, it seems like you would sit in meetings and people would want to opine. And I don't know, you're not adding a lot of value. Why are you here? Are you here to either be the leader to help us drive this thing forward or be a follower and collectively help us accomplish the mission? So it took me a long time to transition to appreciate that, no, there is this other way of functioning, which is talking about things for a long time. And I do think large companies struggle with that. That was one of my experiences at Microsoft in particular. I love Microsoft for many reasons, but part of the challenge was it did feel like we spent a lot of time about building consensus and figuring out how you're going to collaborate. And I think military leaders in particular are much more clear about, look, if it's your decision, that's fine. Make the decision. But if it's my decision, I'm going to make the decision. I'll take your input. I'm certainly excited to hear about it, but at some point we got to move forward. So I think the speed is one of the things that is a characteristic.
Decisiveness, lead, follow, or get out of the way resonates a lot with me, mostly working with imperfect information. Nobody's holding a gun to your head when you're running a SaaS business, I hope.
Yep.
Maybe there's some rare exceptions, but we've all had those VCs.
Yes.
Sometimes you just got to make a decision, and whatever decision is, live with it and move on. All right. Speaking of moving on,